Musician Sam Smith dresses up as the devil to sing a song on the Grammys called Unholy. We'll check out that story and see where it goes. Then we'll check out another musical. This one is really great. In this musical, Jesus is non-binary, whatever that means. Oh, and Judas is a girl and the disciples are girls, or maybe one of them is gay. At this point, who knows? In addition, Biden at the actual National Prayer Breakfast prays for tolerance and inclusivity. Then we'll learn that the new King of England plans to have an LGBTQAAIP #++ choir for his coronation, which is also nice. And if we have time, we'll talk about my favorite sport, surfing. I'm Matt Odegaard, and this is Church Public. Well, welcome back to Church Public. I'm your host, Matt Odegaard, as always, and I really appreciate you stopping by. We have got a lot going on today. So I just wanted to say, hey, if you haven't already, subscribe and like and press all the buttons and do all the things on all of the platforms. If you're on iTunes or Apple or Spotify, I think I'm on Amazon at this point, Amazon Music or however that works. YouTube, this will be on if I don't get kicked off of it. We'll see what happens there. And of course, as always, you can go to churchpublic.com. The front page is the audio podcast /podcast is the place where the videos are. So if you want to see some of this on video, you can go there. I appreciate it. And if you do all the likes and subscribes and shares, basically here's the deal. Like if you like this and it's helpful, giving these current events from a Christian perspective, then share with somebody you know that also is trying to figure out what to do in this world. How do we live? How do we operate in these crazy times? Because I want to help you with that. And if this is helpful at all, I just hope that you would pass this along. That's what's helpful to me if you want to be. So appreciate that. And as always, I'm just trying to help you understand how to live in the world, but as Jesus says, not be like the world, not be of the world. So we got a bunch of news things going on today, and we want to jump right into it. So here's the first story, and I guess the question is Sam Smith the devil? Here's a picture. So if you're just watching, this is Sam Smith. He was a singer. What was the song? Stay With Me, I think was the song that he did. And, it was very popular. I guess he was gay back then. Now he's non-binary or something, whatever that means. But at any rate, if you're just listening, this is a picture of Sam Smith with a top hat, but devil horns on, dressed all in red and in red lighting, and it's all red. Now, I watched his performance at the Grammys, which was a nationally televised experience. The Grammys, I mean, it is the pinnacle of musical celebration, apparently, right? And has been for years and years and years. So this is not a fringe thing that happened. It's not a random music video that happened. This is the music video. No, I'm sorry, not the music video. This is the musical performance they decided to do for the Grammys in front of everybody in the room and everybody in the world who is watching the Grammys, potentially even children. And this person dressed up like the devil with devilish looking people surrounding him. I don't know what to do with these pronouns anymore. And then there was another person that was participating in this together, and that's the one that we have to talk about too, because participating with Sam Smith was a person named Kim Petra. Kim Petra is a man who has now transitioned into being a woman, and this particular person also is dealing with satanic rituals, I guess. And so Kim Petra said this of both the evening and their music together with Sam in general. Kim Petra said, quote, "I think a lot of people honestly have kind of labeled what I stand for and what Sam stands for as religiously not cool. And I personally grew up I personally grew up in wondering about religion and wanting it to be a part of it, but slowly realizing it didn't want me to be a part of it." That's why that was kind of confusing language, but I'll continue on this quote. So it's a take on not being able to choose religion and not being able to live that people might want you to live, because as a trans person, again, this is Kim Petra talking, I'm already not kind of wanted in religion. So we were doing a take on that, and I was kind of Hell Keeper Kim. Hellkeeper Kim. So that was this Kim Petra's description of how they were doing this. And by the way, again, I can't even show you the video. That was my point. Like, I watched it and I can't play it for you. I cannot in good conscience play you what happened on the video. And I would say, if you want to go watch it, do it at your, just be careful while you're watching it. It's Kim Petra, this trans person, is in a cage, and there are demons, I guess, running around keeping Kim in, or maybe I don't know. I don't understand it. It's modern art, but it's also satanic art or something. And so that's what you have here. You have Sam Smith dressed as Satan or something, and then Kim Petra, who is some kind of demon, devil, Hellkeeper Kim, according to this person's own description. And so this is what's going on stage on the Grammys. Now, I think what we have to do, because here's the thing. It's easy to point out when people literally dress up like the devil. That's pretty easy. But we have to scale back just a little bit and see what's going on here in terms of a cultural perspective, in terms of a biblical worldview, like what's really going on. And this is nothing new. I've actually showed you many clips of people dressing like Satan. Nas X dressed like Satan and did some really gross things in a video a few months ago. There have been many musicians over the years who dress like Satan. That's actually pretty obvious. And so, yeah, I'm offended because it's weird and gross. But I think the bigger cultural reality is what we really have to look at. And the fact is, as I've described, this is not a fringe music video. It's not a music video that nobody's going to watch. This is the Grammys, the biggest musical show in the world, perhaps. And this artist has chosen to illustrate Satan as part of their thing. And really the bigger thing here is not just that this artist chose to do it, but that the Grammys themselves said, yes, we're going to mainstream this artist and their art, which is Satan worship. It's a satanic ritual, if you will, on the main stage for this show, which is in celebration of music in America and really around the world. So as a cultural perspective, this is what the mainline culture is telling you is the best art. And they ended up winning. Sam Smith and Kim Petra ended up winning something like the best combo duo or something like that. Okay, whatever. But the point is, they won, and that is the culture saying, this is what we value. This is what we like. And I was reading about this and looking into this, and one person that brought up Milton. And so Milton wrote Paradise Lost, an interesting book about losing salvation and going to hell and what Satan looks like and all of that. And it's an interesting book because I think he wrote it somewhere in the 1700s. I mean, this is old now at this point, right? But that book inspired generation upon generation of people who became like Satan. And what I mean by that is not like this obvious thing. I'll even put this up for you again. Like this obvious thing where this man is literally wearing horns and dressed in red. It's that the key of Satan is to worship yourself, to be so prideful and so selfish that nothing else matters in the world. And that's what we really have to like pay attention to here. And that's why this is so important and why it's so tricky to define, because we're looking at this, satanic worship element, but what it really is the worship of self, where this artist and Petra, the other artist, are saying the highest expression of myself is to do whatever I want to do. And to get back to Milton and in Paradise Lost for a minute, one of the great quotes of the book that has been kind of turned sideways, but one of the great quotes is better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And that's what Milton said in Paradise Lost. And the effect is that you want to have power, autonomy, authority, and the ability to do whatever you want, even if that's in hell, rather than being a servant to anyone or anything ever, especially in heaven. So this goes along with our culture, right? This is why this is an important story to look at, more than just the weird satanic costumes and ritual that these artists did in the mainline Grammys, because this is our culture. Our culture is such radical autonomy, this radical individualism where you are you, right? You be you. You live your truth. It doesn't matter what anybody else does. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. What you say is what goes. That's the epitome of this self-worship. And that's what we hear from Milton in Paradise Lost. And that's what we see in a really gross and dumbed down version through this song. And again, this Unholy song, I looked at it to see if I could read some of the quotes to you from the song, and I can't. So I'm not going to read the song to you. I'm not going to play the video for you. You're going to have to either use your imagination or, again, with great care, go and listen to it or watch it. And I'm not suggesting that. In fact, anyway, I'm just going to leave it out there. So this goal for Milton, this is almost 300 years ago now, is to be completely individual, just a radical individual. And it's the same goal today. It's exactly the same. It's some statement of like, my own satisfaction, me doing what I want, is more important than doing what's right or good or true. And that's the difference that we see from a religious, a biblical worldview where you don't do what you want to do, you do what is right, and this cultural worldview, which is a satanic worldview in the sense that it doesn't matter what anybody else does. It doesn't matter what's good. It doesn't matter what's true. The only thing that matters is your truth. The only thing that matters is what you want to do. And if you live out exactly what you want to do, regardless of what it does, who it hurts, what pornography it shows to other people, it doesn't matter because you've been authentic to yourself, so you are okay. And that's where we get to this. Interestingly, I know this is kind of some deep cuts for you, and for those that don't love history or literature, skip forward a minute, but I would suggest listening if you want to be enlightened a little bit, perhaps. So after Milton came Mary Shelley, and so Shelley is the one who wrote Frankenstein, which is a fascinating progression of literature from Paradise Lost through Frankenstein and actually through some other horror literature of the genre. And I'm not going to get into that right now because, again, I don't want to put you to sleep, but just for a quick moment, Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, which was a horror about the idea that you have to be conformed to something and you should radically break out of that conforming and be who you want to be, and that you could recreate who you are without God. That really is the baseline for it, which is exactly what we're talking about. But Shelley said, quote, Milton's devil, that's what we just talked about, as a moral being is far superior to his God, as one who perseveres in some purpose which he has conceived to be excellent in spite of adversity and torture. So in other words, it's the same thing that we're talking about. It doesn't matter who you hurt. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what's good. It doesn't matter what's right or what is true. The only thing that matters is that you be you. And this, again, is 300 years ago. Actually, Shelley was more like 200, mid 19th century, early 19th century. But still, this is exactly the same words that we say today, just in a more colloquial or present day language to the time. And this is the role of Satan, right? He doesn't seek to do any good for anyone else. That's the problem with Satan, is he's wholeheartedly selfish. The goal is to rule himself over being ruled by anybody else, especially God. This was the way that Milton portrayed Satan. Shelley took up the idea of Satan, and then in a really small and gross way, Sam and Petra are also showing Satan to be, or themselves to be like Satan, in that they are just choosing exactly what they want rather than what is good for the world, good for society. And this is the view. This is why this is culturally relevant, and you need to understand the underpinnings of what's going on here, because this is the view of society and religion from the current culture. They say that culture, that religion is so, you've heard, bigoted and racist and any of the phobics, right? It's all of these things. And the reason that it is it doesn't allow you to be you. So that religion, that culture, that foundation must be thrown away. The idea is now that you must worship yourself. You must choose for yourself. You be you, live your truth. You must worship yourself. You are the center of your universe. And we all together must celebrate who you are and what choices you've made to celebrate you. That is why this is in the middle of the Grammys. It's in the middle of this huge award show that's the Grammy TV, and we now see this idea of celebrating yourself in every TV show, in every advertisement, in every classroom, in family-friendly drag shows, et cetera, et cetera. The entire culture is permeated with this kind of thinking. And then once you throw off all of this obligation of society, morality, and of course, religion and God, then and only then do you feel better about yourself because you have no more guilt about what has been weighed down over the centuries from your upbringing in religiosity and your upbringing in actual morals and values and truth. You just throw all of that off, and the culture celebrates you throwing all of that off, and now you're free. Only you're really not. And that's the problem here. The big lie, which the devil always does, is that if you leave from God and truth and reality and morality, you're going to be better off and you're going to be more free. But the reality is, as always, that is when you truly become a slave to your desires, a slave to sin, which is the tragedy in all of this. But it is what it is. This is creating culture from the oldest even to the very youngest, and from the bottom to the top. Even Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, the president's wife, was here at the Grammys. She made an appearance at the Grammys, and I think that says something, because that's an endorsement of the evening. As far as I know, we've all been told for years at this point that if you are present at an event with a religious bigot or a white supremacist or anybody else that the left doesn't like, you are guilty of their crimes as well. So using that logic, she, the First Lady of the United States of America, is in full endorsement of the satanic ritual that Sam Smith and Kim Petra performed, right? I don't know. I don't make these rules, but those are the rules that people have made. This is not a fringe thing, as I mentioned. It's not just some random music video in the back dark corners of YouTube. This is the mainstream, all the way from the Grammys, the biggest musical celebration in the land, all the way up to the top of the political order. They want you to embrace your true self and your worship and remove all hindrance from any expression, especially sexual expression. They want you to express whatever you want and throw all of the shackles off so that you can do whatever you want and you be you in any way that you want. And that's just not great for society. We're seeing it degrade in real time here. And the solution, of course, is to get back to the foundations. But before we get to the foundations of biblical values, which we definitely need to get back to, we have to talk more about sexual expression. And I don't really want to, but unfortunately we have to, because now even Jesus Christ Superstar is non-binary. So again, if you're not watching and you're just listening, I do really appreciate you, and I thank you so much for being part of this. I will describe to you in the best way that I can. I'll show you a still image here, and then we'll actually watch their promo video for this. But this is Jesus Christ Superstar, the musical. If you're not familiar, it came out somewhere, I think, late 60s, maybe early 70s. Of course, I can say with certainty that the theology of Jesus Christ Superstar is not great. I mean, obviously that's true. But at least the goal, it seems, from Jesus Christ Superstar the musical was to portray that Jesus, the Son of God, came to save the world. Now, they leave out sin and the cross and the resurrection, and they leave out some things for sure, whatever. But this new one, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do with it, because it is now put on by the, here, I'll get the name of the person. This is Edinburgh University Society of Opera Center or something like that. So Savoy Opera Group, I apologize. Edinburgh University Savoy Opera Group. And they are doing Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice's musical Jesus Christ Superstar. But in this particular version, they're doing it with non-binary Jesus Christ Superstar. I'm going to play a little bit of this trailer as we go through. I'll turn it down a little bit because it's just the sweet guitar. Hey, and I got to say, again, if you're just listening, the guitar tone's pretty sick. But that's not what we're talking about today. So if you weren't watching, first we had Judas. So Judas is a girl. And then Jesus, who to me looks also like a girl, but it's apparently a non-binary Jesus because half of her hair is blonde and half of her hair is brown. And then we see the disciples, who look to me all girls, maybe lesbians. I don't know. There's one that looks like gay guy. I don't know what to say anymore. They're playing like Uno. I really don't understand that, but whatever. And then finally, in this trailer, the flag starts waving and Jesus comes in, and Jesus is going to save the day from something. I don't even know, because it doesn't seem to be following the actual storyline of the musical. But there's the theme, Jesus Christ Superstar. And here's Jesus standing up, and it's a young teenage girl with half blonde hair and half brown hair who, according to their description, which I'll read in a second, is non-binary. And, oh, here's a little song. They're singing. Oh, and it's flashing. Again, if you're not watching, it's flashing from Jesus before being crucified to with the crown of thorns. And then it ends on Judas as a girl with curly hair. And that's what's happening in this. Anyway, I know the culture's going to do whatever the culture's going to do. I mean, I do get that. But the reason we have to talk about this is this is what the culture thinks, right? The culture thinks they should do whatever they want to do. This is what we were talking about with the Grammys as well. And if the Bible, for instance, who talks about Jesus as being literally the Son of God, doesn't line up with the reality they want, they'll just invent a new reality. Again, I realize this is a musical, but what we're looking at in the larger scale is this culture is saying through this musical, I don't like the constraints of religion. I don't like that Jesus is just a man, and a man and God, obviously, theologically, but just a man. So we're going to make Jesus not a man because that fits in better if I'm struggling with my gender. We're just going to change reality again, right? So that's what we see. And so here is the... I guess this is the producer talking. They say the production is licensed as gender neutral, allowing all performers to portray any character, despite the typical classifications of, quote, male roles and, quote, female roles. Because Jesus was a man, but that's fine. Okay, keep going. This says, the production team made the arrangement with Andrew Lloyd Webber Licensing, making the show officially gender neutral in terms of casting. The producer, Lou Foreman, told us they really pushed for this arrangement because it's not that I don't think we could have found men to play these fantastic roles. I'm confident that we could have done. It was more about the idea of equal opportunity. So, so the idea is to be equal opportunity, Jesus has to be a girl, I guess. Again, we're just in the land of not reality, so do whatever you want. But here's, again, I just have to say, like, here's the problem. It's a real story. Like that's the problem again, right? So I'm just because I have to wave this every once in a while. I have to wave my Bible every once in a while. If you're just listening, I got to wave my Bible and be like, okay, you can write whatever story you want. Like, again, more power to you. If you're creative and you can write stories, please write stories, write whatever story you want. But if you take an actual story from something like the Bible that is history, and then you change it and make it into something that you want it to be, well, then it's not the Bible and it's not even your story. You just took a story that you didn't like and changed it to what you like, which is actually a problem because then you're imposing your reality on something that isn't real, and you're going to have to deal with that at some point or another. And so it just creates this non-religion. But anyway, we'll keep moving on because I got a couple more stories I want to get to. I just thought Jesus as non-binary, whatever that means, was another level. Anyway, back to religion, because let's talk about some more religion here, because this is Joe Biden, and Joe Biden went and did a prayer breakfast, and he did this prayer breakfast. Let's see if I have this here. So this is Joe Biden as the prayer breakfast, and this is February 2, Joe, a couple days ago now, and he did a couple of statements, I guess. I don't know if you'd call it prayers, but he was talking about how we need to be more connected and more tolerant, right? He's talking about this. He says Congress needs more religions. So here's a couple of quotes that he had. Loving our neighbor, so Biden said, loving our neighbor is also part of the essence of the American promise, a promise that comes with new Congress that is more diverse and more different. Now, on the face, like, I guess I don't really have a problem with that. Like, that's fine. We should be more diverse in the sense that we this country, this world has a lot of different people. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. There's neither slave nor Jew nor Greek nor free. Paul tells us that in Ephesians or in Colossians. And so, I mean, sure, I don't have a problem with every color represented of the rainbow. I mean, sure, great. I love people and I love all people. We are all created in God's image, and we should be able to celebrate together, pray together. The ground of the foot of the cross is level, so we come to God in the same place. Paul tells us in Romans that we come to God in the same place, having all sinned and all needing the Savior Jesus. But then he goes on, of course, to say this. So we need more diverse, more different, more religions, more races, more diversity than ever before in our history. People of all faiths, some people of no faith, gay, straight, immigrant, Native American. Differences express the infinite creativity of God, who is able to see his reflection countless ways in countless people. So here's the problem and where it goes off the rails, because again, you have to have some foundation. So if you want the foundation to be Native American, for instance, and you want the foundation to be, let's choose Native American like Aztec, where they had child sacrifice and human sacrifice. Like, is that the faith that we want to have? Is that the thing that we're aiming for? Or Muslim, where no faith except for Islam exists, and if you go radical Muslim, then you have to eliminate those other faiths from the earth. Or you go to Hindu, that had temple child prostitutes for years and years. And in fact, there's still parts of India that have the temple child prostitutes today. Like, is that the faith that we want? Or are we talking about, like, this National Day of Prayer was created? Are we talking about the faith of our founding fathers, like Christianity, by and large? Right. So are we basing our faith on Christ? Because that's different. And I know this is the not popular thing, but that's actually exclusive. You can't have the other faiths and have Christianity commingle. It coexist just doesn't work as a theme. And I could go through each of those religions and see how, not just from Christianity's perspective, but from other faith perspectives as well, they don't believe in Christianity, or they don't believe Christianity is the right. So at some level, you're going to have to choose. At some level, you're going to have to decide. And Biden says, well, we're just going to have more religions, more races, more diversity, people of all faith, people of no faith, gay, straight, immigrant, Native American. I'm not sure how those fit in, but sure. But again, then you get into, well, are we following the God of the Bible? Even if you're Jewish, like, well, then gay, straight, like how are we determining these things, and how are we figuring out the differences between us, and not just loving people, but accepting them? And that's the problem. So how do we all connect in this and join? And he says, Biden says, quote, "We can come together to do big things for the country. We can join hands and get things done. We can redeem the soul of America." Then he goes on to say, what is the soul of the nation? The soul is the breath, the life, the essence of who we are. The soul makes us us. It's embodied in the sacred proposition, we're all created equally in the image of God. End quote. Okay, I actually agree. I do believe we have a soul. I do believe we are created in the image of God. However, which God? Again, you just said we have more religions and more faith. This is just a pluralist view of all roads lead to heaven, but even in other faiths, they don't. In the Muslim faith, all roads do not lead to God. You must only worship Allah. That's it. And I was gonna speak Arabic there for a second, but I thought twice of it. Anyway, like, if that, or Jewish, if you're Jewish, that there is only one way. Again, so which God are we talking about? When you say diversity is our strength, in terms of people, yes, we do need to be diverse in terms of our people. In terms of faith, diversity is not a strength. Diversity just makes us really confused because we don't know which faith we're actually talking about. So I'm going to give a big no. Like, no, we cannot have diversity in faith. He even goes on to say something about, like, keeping the faith. I was going to clip it because that's the phrase that I always use. But he talked about a story. I didn't even write it down. I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head here. But he talked about keeping the faith, and that was a phrase that it was either his parents or someone he knew constantly repeated. And maybe it was grandma or something when he was a kid. But But which faith? Like, that's where I get to. Like, what are we talking about? Who are we talking about? Which God are we talking about? You can't keep the faith if you don't know what faith you're keeping. It gets back to this idea of why I like conservatism, because I want to conserve the traditions of the past. I want to conserve the foundations of things that went before. Because if we're just inventing new things, when they don't work out, and they won't, like our Finnish ice skater the other day we saw, when they don't work out, then what do? Now you have to figure it out again. But why recreate something that we have all the answers for in the Bible? We just could turn to if we had a little bit less selfishness and a little bit less pride. But anyway, so he talks about the soul of the nation, and he talks about it is what makes us us. I would agree, and I have more thoughts about that. But just for now, I'm going to talk about this idea. He said that the sacred proposition, quote unquote, is something that is rooted in Scripture and enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. Again, I totally agree with that. I think it's rooted in Scripture, and I think it's enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, but that is completely at odds with the former statement that we need to have more religions represented and more gender identities represented, because neither of those things are either enshrined in the Declaration of Independence nor enshrined in Scripture. That's just not the way it is. And we need to recognize that when they make this prayer breakfast, but they're not praying to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose son is Jesus Christ, I don't know who they're praying for. And it might as well be the same as Sam Smith's devil worshiping song at the Grammys. And I know that's going to sound maybe extreme to some of you, but what you have to realize is it's all the same thing. Yes, it's easy to point at the person who is literally dressed as a devil and say, you're dressed as Satan. It's harder to look at the devil, who is, by the way, an angel of light, that's what the Bible calls the devil, and notice that the subtle things, the easy things to look at, oh, it sounds great to have diversity. It sounds great to have diversity of faith. But when you look at God, who says he's a jealous God, God who put in the 10 Commandments, you shall have no other God but him, God who says, don't make idols of anybody else, and people die over this because of God's jealousy. Maybe having other faiths and other religions is not pleasing to what God has. So again, the takeaway is I'm all for a prayer breakfast. I think we should pray more as a country, as a people, as a community. We should pray without ceasing for our leaders and for our country. However, if you remove the Christianity from the prayer, well, I'm not sure to whom you're praying. All right, let's talk about King Charles. I don't care that much about British things, but sometimes it's interesting to look at. And the reason it's interesting to look at is because a lot of things that are happening in England now are things that will happen in America. Or if you back that up a little bit, things that have happened in England have now happened in America. We seem to be behind them a little bit, but not that much. And so we need to see what they're doing to understand what may happen here, because culturally, their culture, it seems, is a little bit more progressed in the progressive ideology than we are. So King Charles's coronation will feature an LGBTQAAIP #++ choir because of, I guess, inclusion. Again, inclusion. But what does that mean? And so I have this article. I'm not going to read too much of it, but looks like Saturday, the 6th of May, coronation of King Charles III and his wife, Queen Consort Camilla, will be held at Westminster Abbey, will be conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. And I'm actually reading from Pink News here, which is an interesting news source. Again, I can't recommend it, but this is where I'm reading this from. Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who remains confident in his decision to deny same-sex marriage in the Church of England, because it's not biblical, but that's beside the point for right now. Anyway, on that Sunday, that would be May the 7th, coronation concert will be held by BBC at Windsor Castle. The coronation concert will feature the Coronation Choir. And here we go. It is a diverse group created from the nation's keenest, this is the quote here, keenest community choirs and amateur singers from across the UK, including refugee choirs, NHS choirs, and LGBTQ plus singing groups and deaf signing choirs. So in other words, this choir is all about inclusion. It's all about inclusivity. It's all about bringing the culture, quote unquote, into the monarchy. But here's the problem with that. much like now, again, I'm not the biggest fan of the monarchy, though I think Queen Elizabeth, and I did a whole episode on this if you want to go back in the archives at any of your podcast places or churchpublic.com. I thought she led really well. And the reason that I thought she led really well, one of the main ones, is that she held tradition, and particularly spiritual tradition, of a high value, even above herself and her own wishes, interests, and life. In other words, just like we've been talking about, she lived for something beyond herself. Whereas this ceremony clearly is not about tradition, it's not about monarchy, it's not about spirituality, it's about radical gender inclusion in the modern current cultural age. So I read an article by Carl Trueman, a guy whom I respect. Great book, by the way, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. If you want some deep reading into where our culture is, I would highly recommend The Rise and Triumph of Modern Self by Carl Trueman. But this article talks about the king and the coronation quite a bit because he is, in fact, British, or had at least come from there. And I'm not going to read the whole article for you. You can find it at firstthings.com. Article is titled Identity Politics at the King's Coronation. But the reason I think this is interesting and of Christian worldview context is this highlights the fact that we are being tricked by this inclusion and tolerance ideal. And that's the reality that we looked at the Grammys, at the prayer breakfast, and now in the King's coronation. The idea is you should include everybody. Everybody should be included. Everybody should be part of the party. And it sounds all well and good until you realize that it's not everybody. If you're like me and you read the Bible and believe the Bible and want to do what it says, if you're a pastor, if you're a regular Christian, even if you have other Abrahamic faith ideals, most of these things you cannot get behind. Especially in the radical LGBTQ indoctrination ideology. You just cannot get behind these things. So then what do you do with inclusivity or tolerance? And Carl Trueman says it this way. He says, this is just a political confidence trick. And I like that because that's the thing. When you redefine all of these words, and we talk about redefining words a lot, but when you redefine all of these words, what happens is you realize that you can't use them in the same way, and it's like a con man. They like con you into thinking that what they're saying is the real thing, even though it's really hard. So he goes on to say, quote, inclusivity is simply the rhetorically powerful word to exclude people. It's what people who the inclusive do not approve. The model of society these progressive inclusiveness propose is not really more all-embracing than that which it looks to be replacing. So I'm going to pause there for a second just to sum up. And this is what he's saying. He's saying this whole radical inclusive ideology where you just accept all of these quote-unquote fringe elements, which now, as I've mentioned, even in the Grammys and the King's coronation and the president's address are clearly not mainstream. If the literal leaders of two giant world governments and the biggest musical expression on the planet all are highlighting this, I feel like that's not fringe anymore. But anyway, so the idea is for inclusivity, you must include these. However, what it really is saying is if you are not in that club, you are excluded. So this radical inclusion is great for anybody who is in that club. But if you are not, as I mentioned, if you're a believing Christian and professing Christian and you actually believe what the Bible says about sex between a man and a woman, or a man being a man or a woman being a woman, you're out of this club. And in fact, as Carl Trueman says, it's far more exclusive in this. I'll read more of this quote. He says, given that subscription to the contemporary credo of identity politics is fast becoming a condition of being considered a legitimate member of society, in other words, all of that big language to say, if you don't follow this, you are out of society. He goes on to say, Carl Trueman, quote, unprecedented outside of shamelessly totalitarian regimes, end quote. And the point here is you see this in totalitarian regimes, but now we're seeing it just in regular society, regular culture. Even to the point that I've mentioned in the past, this Carl Trueman brings up, there's a man who served his country, the old non-inclusive country, that was fined last year for merely praying in silence outside of an abortion clinic. I brought you that story I even brought you another story of a woman who had the same thing happen to her. And this is the reality that we're moving into. You are not allowed to practice your faith in public anywhere unless your faith includes what they're calling culturally appropriate. So trans ideology, worshiping the devil, apparently LGBTQ choirs. If you're all fine and good with all of that, then you're fine and you're a welcome member of society. If you raise your hand and say, hey, I think marriage is between a man and a woman, if you think, hey, I think a man is a man and cannot actually physically really become a woman, then you are literally ostracized from society and potentially even arrested. You cannot say those things. You can't believe those things. You cannot voice that in the public square because it is not culturally possible, permissible in this new cultural reality where they say we're all about inclusion and tolerance, except for the ideas that we don't, which tend to be even more radical than the previous. And that's the reality that we're quickly moving into. And that's why the story about King Charles, including the LGBTQ choir, it moves away from a tradition that Queen Elizabeth held for 70 years as ruler, and a tradition that goes back far more, hundreds, if not thousands of years before that, to British and English rule on the foundations of the Bible. The monarchy represented the foundation of the Bible. Now, I have theological problems with that, and I'm not calling for that. But what I'm saying is the rule of the monarch points to the traditions of government and the traditions of Scripture. So if you're going to throw all of those away and say, well, we're just going to go with whatever the culture is doing, then the monarchy is just rendered useless because what's the point? It doesn't point to anything. It doesn't point to tradition because you're just going to throw tradition out the window. It doesn't point to Christianity because you're just throwing Christianity out the window. It doesn't point to spirituality or morality or actual truth because you're just throwing those things out the window. And that's why that's an important cultural moment to watch for when it's going to happen. But we just have to realize it's just another way that this culture has gone well beyond any tradition that we could have. I know I'm getting a bit long. I had a story here that I'll probably skip about a police officer who was not fired, but quoted the book of Ephesians and then was told by his department that he had to either never quote the Bible again, basically, or leave and quit and retire or be fired. So he quit. I thought that was a sad and terrible story. And this is where I'm saying this is. I mean, I wasn't going to spend much time on this, and I won't spend much anyway. But it does stand that if you go against this cultural norm that is radical inclusion in all of the ideologies, then you cannot even have a job. That's the direction that we're going. And again, I'm not scared. I'm not fearful. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but I want to get to my favorite sport if I can, because you guys know, some of you know, my favorite sport is surfing, even though at the present time where I am, I don't get to surf very much, if at all. But I'm going to say my favorite sport still is surfing. So one of the great surfers and great success stories. So even if you're not a surfer, you probably know this name. You probably know this story. Bethany Hamilton was attacked by a tiger shark, lost her arm, but kept being a professional surfer and made quite a career with one arm, which is incredible. Well more than I will ever do in surfing. Well more than most people will ever do in surfing. She is an incredible story of perseverance. And I've appreciated watching her grow in her surfing and her competition. It's been really good. Now, for those that don't know, in the surfing world, the WSL, the World Surf League, is kind of the administrating organization over surfing. I'm not going to get too much into that because I know most of you don't care. But what has just changed is that the World Surf League will now include trans people, men who want to be women, in women's surfing, which just like the track and field, the running, the swimming, all of these other sports that we've looked at over the past couple of years, it's a terrible idea because the men who surf are obviously going to just crush and dominate the women. Sorry, women, that's just the way it is. It's going to happen, and everybody knows this. So Bethany Hamilton who is a great figure in surfing, went and said this. We'll listen to a little bit of this. It's probably like a 3-minute clip, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I think it's important to hear a little bit of it, and then we'll talk about it.
Today, I want to address the news that the World Surf League has officially made the rule that male-bodied individuals known as transgender athletes can officially compete in the women's division. The World Surf League says they are following the Olympic guidelines. While I address this issue, I want to be clear that I strive to have love for all of mankind, regardless of any differences. But this concerns me as a professional athlete that has been competing in the World Surf League events for the past 15 plus years, and I feel that I must speak up and stand up for those in position that may feel that they cannot say something about this. I'm
going to pause it there for a second and just say she's 100% correct. Men surfing in women's competitions is just wrong on its face, because that leaves then no place for women to succeed. Sure, some of the men will not be as good as women. As a man, I would be just shredded and dominated by this one-armed girl surfer. She would destroy me in all the surfing. I know that. And so, sure, some of that will happen. But in general, a professional men's surfer who all of a sudden decides they're a woman is also going to shred the women. And that's just not fair to them. I don't talk about fairness very often, but this just isn't right. And she has it altogether right. However, I also want to just jump in here and say she made a mistake, and she made an error that a lot of people who are new to this, I guess new to this fight, new to this challenge, make. And that is, she said something like, I care for all people and want all people to be included or accepted or whatever. And that's an error. It's an error because reality is reality, and we have to say that, and we have to acknowledge that. So a man wanting to be a woman is not real. You can have issues, and you can have sympathy for a person. You can help them. You can counsel them. You can love them personally and individually. But as a group, you can't apologize for this. You can't say everybody should just be accepted. This is not biblical. So if you go to Jesus, even, I don't know, choose John 4, the woman at the well. Because this is used a lot, right, in this conversation, that Jesus accepted the woman at the well, and even though she was an adulteress and she had all these husbands and was really immoral sexually, he just loved her, and so we're just to love everybody and meet them where they are. Now, that's almost true. It's like a half-truth. Yes, we're supposed to love people, and we're supposed to meet them where they are, but we're also supposed to tell them the truth. And that's what Jesus does in the story of the woman at the well also. He says, hey, you don't have a husband now, and you've had 5 husbands, and you need to stop doing that and go and sin no more and live differently. And that's where she turns the conversation then to worship, because she recognizes that he is more than a man, and she recognizes that she needs to get her life right spiritually. So we can't just say, you be you and live your truth and do whatever, and that's okay, because that's not okay. And that's not what Jesus modeled to us, and it's not acknowledging the truth. Jesus lives in grace and truth, and we need to have more grace. Sometimes we have to have more grace than we do and meet people with sympathy where they are when they're struggling with these things. But we also can't do that without mentioning there are true things too, and that's the hard part. We can... I had a one guy tell me one time, you need to have a tear in your eye while you're telling the true things. So you have to feel the compassion for a person that's struggling, but also not avoid true things. And it's hard, but we have to do that. And we have to be able to do that and be willing to do that. I think I won't play the rest of this clip. You can go and watch it. It's pretty much all over the internets at this point, went kind of viral. But it's important to just recognize that she was altogether right in saying that this is a bad action, and men should not compete against women in surfing or any sport for that matter. But we can't apologize for people who are struggling with this. They just need to figure out how to get through this, and we have to give them grace and compassion and sympathy. But we can't ruin women's lives by helping other people feel better about themselves. That's not helpful in the long run. And just as a side note, I'm wondering how long it's going to be. Maybe like 5 minutes before Bethany Hamilton is canceled and forced to retract and apologize. And I know, Bethany, You don't know me. You will probably not hear this, and that's fine. But I'm going to encourage you, Bethany, don't apologize. You're not wrong. They are wrong. And when they call you transphobic and the other phobics and all the isms, I hope that you say the right thing is, and this is hard, but I hope that you say, I don't care. I don't care what you think. And I don't, and that's okay. And this is biblical. It's don't, here's a great proverb for you. Just like a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool returns to his folly. Go and look that one up. I won't even give you the reference. I'll search for that one. That is an actual proverb. I did not make that up. But the point of this is, if someone is foolish, you don't go to them over and over and over again trying to convince them of something that you know is right, because they're not going to get it. So when people call you all the names and call you all the phobics and call you all the isms because they're mad that you are saying true things, you can say, I don't care. I'm going to say the true things. I'm sorry you're upset by true things, but the reality is you're not mad at me. You're mad because you don't like God. You don't like that this world does operate on rules, that you really are in God's kingdom, whether you want to admit it or not, and you're going to have to choose how to move forward, and you can go against God and end up in Sam Smith's hell, or you can go with God, deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow Jesus. I think what we should do is end with a great song that I found from the good old Mr. Rogers. Some of you may have grown up with Mr. Rogers. I know I did. And I appreciated him. If you didn't know, he was a minister before he was Mr. Rogers. He had a great founding in theology. And if nothing else, he wrote this song, and I think we should listen to it.
Are fancy on the outside. Some are fancy on the inside. Yes, sir. Everybody's fancy. Everybody's fine. Your body's fancy, and so is mine. Boys are boys from the beginning. If you were born a boy, you stay a boy. Girls are girls right from the start. If you were born a girl, you stay a girl and grow up to be a lady. Everybody's fancy, everybody's fine. Your body's fancy, and so is mine.
That'll about do it for us today. For Church Public, I'm Matt Odegaard. As always, I hope that you will keep the faith.